Welcome to the Streets Are Planning podcast. I'm your host, Jay Ruffin, and I'm grateful to be with you again. I'm excited to be joined by two of my favorite urban planners, Idemudia and Jasmine Jones-Bynes, for a special three-part podcast series that leads up to a Planner with a Purpose activation at the American Planning Association's National Planning Conference in Detroit, Michigan. In part one of this series, we're going to explore how planners navigate the work and the intergenerational experiences that can divide or bring together Black urban planners. I need to just make sure that I mention this to you all, that a planner with a purpose is the vision of Nina Idemudia, who has created a space in the lead up to the conference that's designed to bring together urban planners and fellowship, resource sharing, and inspiration for our continued work in the communities that we serve across the country. Make sure that you tune in to the podcast series by following Queen Tone Pod and the 4 Degrees to the Streets podcast on socials, and make plans to join us Thursday, April 23rd in Detroit, Michigan for the live activation. Follow at Planner with a Purpose on IG for registration information to be a part of an unforgettable experience in Detroit. For a period of time, I've been thinking about how to try to frame this series and what I think the Planner with a Purpose activation feels like, or should feel like, when we all gather in April. It reminds me of growing up as a church kid. We used to have with church revivals that would come to town, and we would always have these visiting pastors and evangelists and choirs that were coming from Chicago or coming from Detroit or coming from all of these great places to our community, and they made it their mission to kind of help us revive our faith, bring fellowship, and create a safe space to basically come home. And as Black urban planners, it's important that we gather at the local, regional, and national levels in fellowship to make sure that we're strengthening our resolve for the challenges that are ahead in the work that we do. In that lens, I really couldn't be more excited to bring you a new episode. A previous guest on the Streets of Planning, and the host of the Queen Tone podcast, Nina Idemudia, and her co-host, Dayna Cole. Grateful to have you both on. And we are excited to welcome the first-time guest and host of the 4 Degrees to the Streets podcast. I've been a major fan for a long time, been following, sharing, liking, doing all I can to make sure I get that message out, because it's a wonderful podcast. If you haven't listened to either one, make sure that you are following them on their socials. But as our tradition on the Streets of Planning podcast, we like to let the people know where you're from. As you all know, I'm from the south side of Canton, Ohio. I call Detroit home, call Michigan home, and I've been grateful to travel all over the country. And so I know how important it is for folks to make sure that they know where you're from, where you're representing. And I'm going to start with our first time guest on the show. We'll start with you, Jazz, in regards to where are you from, and feel free to shout out your hood, if you so choose to.
Absolutely. And Jermaine, it's the same for you, watching your show online and following you on Instagram for many years. So I support the Streets Are Planning podcast for sure. I'm from Jersey. I live in Los Angeles. I will always say that the East Coast is the best coast. I know I got mountains and oceans and 90-degree weather in January, but Jersey is where it's at. I love the East Coast, and I'm just grateful to be here. Been working in the planning and real estate space for most of my career. So grateful to have this conversation.
Well, it's great to have you on the show. We look forward to our conversation. I'd also like to welcome first-time guest Dayna Cole. What up, Dayna? What's going on? What up, though? You know what I mean? Let the people know where you from and where you represent.
While I currently reside in Brooklyn, I will forever be a little Black girl from the east side of Detroit. So I represent Detroit, East Warner Outer Drive, to be specific, 48224. So I'm happy to be here and joining in the conversation. I work in the tech space. I'm a leader at the intersection of music, technology, and innovation. And I'm excited to join this conversation in part with Queen Tone, but then also to serve as the voice of the non-planner, and really more so as an informed community member. As people know, I host with Queen Tone with Nina. So even just learning about urban planning or how it impacts me through my friendship and working relationship with Nina. So happy to ask all the million questions of what the
Yes,
non-planners
please
won't
do.
know. I know a lot about tech, not as much about urban planning. So I'm definitely excited to join in on the conversations from the external point of view to see how urban planning impacts me.
Well, well, listen, I'm a firm believer that every person has some urban planner in them because you're navigating your cities, you're navigating communities, and the perspective that you're going to bring to this conversation is much appreciated. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on some of the topics that we'll cover today.
Appreciate it.
And last but not least, my homie, one of the folks that I look to when you're thinking about urban planners in the U.S. and folks who have made like a critical impact, in particular, Black planners and Black women planners. If you're not mentioning Nina's name, you're playing yourself, right? Like, listen, if you're not mentioning Jazz's name, you're playing yourself. These are women who are bringing major contributions, not only on a day-to-day basis with the work that they do, but to the profession as a whole. And so, Nina, I welcome you back to the show, and feel free to share to people where you from.
Yeah, so happy to be back. Are y'all getting an echo? Okay, so happy to be back. Thank you for having us back. Thank you for you and Jasmine collaborating on this podcast series. I'm so excited about it. But if y'all have never heard of me before, my name is Idemudia. I'm from the East Side as well, East Side Detroit. Detroit is the first 5 minutes you meet me, you gonna hear me say I'm from the East Side Detroit. Period, point blank. Because so much of how I grew up in Detroit is why I am the way I am and why I approach planning the way I do. And so I'm really excited to be doing this activation for us, by us, kind of creating these conversations that we're not going to get at planning conferences. I've been a planner for over a decade at this point, almost 15 years. And I've worked both in government, and now I run a nonprofit, a 50-year-old think and do tank that's anchored in Chicago. But recently I decided to found my own kind of company called A Planner with a Purpose. And that has always kind of been my moniker. Like I'm a planner with a purpose. Like I am here to do what I need to do to make sure that the next little Nina has more opportunities than I did. But also still grounded in the culture that Nina was grounded in. And so I think that that's beautiful. So however I can give back and create space, I do it. If you know me, again, it's not even about the words, it's about the action, and I'm about that action. And yeah, I'm really excited to be coming into this conversation, to this entire series. And thank you for having us, Jermaine.
Yeah, listen, I'm grateful to share space with you all, and I'm really looking forward to a dynamic conversation. And when we first had conversations about putting this series together, I got to tell you, I was excited, but then at the same time, I'm like, oh man, this the pressure right now. It's like, how are we going to cover so many topics when you have such dynamic guests as you all? And so one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we touched on, that I thought was a really important part of some of our conversations previously, was this dynamic between relationships with urban planners in the space. When you have some of the OGs and you got some of the newer planners and folks in the mid-career space who all have different perspectives. But one of the things that I've learned over time is, when you enter this urban planning profession, a lot of us come to it not like we grew up like, hey, urban planner is what I wanted to be. It's kind of one of those things that we either stumbled into or we were introduced to in a different way. And so for you all, and we'll kick this off with you, Nina, just from your perspective, how did you come to the profession, and what were some of the experiences that have shaped your early career and where you are today?
Mm-hmm. So I would say, simply put, I'm a planner because I grew up as a girl from the east side of Detroit, taking public transit, trying to get to more opportunity, kind of seeing how, even though I didn't have the language back then, the degrees gave me that, but the reason I'm good at my job is because of my lived experience. And so now I can translate it in a way, because I didn't know what urban planning was until I got to college, but I knew what urban planning was from the day I was born in a specific zip code in a specific area that had already predetermined what opportunities I was going to have. And so like growing up on the east side of Detroit, going to school on to the suburbs, I saw the difference every single day. And that's when I started to ask questions. And that's when I got more curious about history, anthropology, social issues, to understand like what is the why behind the current circumstance. And now I know I'm neurodivergent, which is why I always need to know why before I do anything. I need to know the why.
You are not
And
alone.
so yeah, right. Now we all understand.
Yeah.
We all we all got the neurodivergence. And so just asking why, and then understanding that the why really is just a person making a decision based on their lived experience. So if a person can make decisions that dissect communities, disinvest from communities, perpetuate white supremacy, why can't I be the person to make the decision to counter that? And that's really how I got into the profession. And then like working in government was something that I thought was very much needed, to understand the rules of the game if I'm going to try to change them. And so that's why I spent my time in government. And now at a nonprofit, I'm able to better play that inside outside game, because instead of, community advocates going and getting a closed door, like, nope, that's not possible, that zoning, that thing you want, not possible. Now I speak the language, so you can't speak past me. Not only do I have the lived experience, but I speak your language, and I can see through the bullshit, or I can think through ways to where people see a challenge and then decide that they're going to stay with the status quo. I see a challenge and I say, oh, we can change this. And so yeah, that's how I came into the field.
Man, that's really important. And Jasmine, was your experience the same, or how did you come into the urban planning space?
Yeah, I think, and whenever I talk about people who are in the field of planning, I think a common thread amongst all of us is a curiosity about like why the thing that we're seeing, the landscape, whatever that landscape is, whether it's rural, whether it's urban, whether it's suburban, is the way that it is. And I think it also starts with traveling from one landscape, one environment to another, being able to see the differences and questioning why it's like that. So for me, I grew up in the suburbs with my grandparents, but my mom lived in the city, the largest city in New Jersey, the city of Newark, New Jersey. And so I would go to Newark every weekend. But in Jersey, where I was from in the suburbs, I was comfortable and safe, and my grandparents had no problem with me walking to the park or walking to the store or doing different things like that. But when I would go visit my mom in the city, I would notice that none of the parks were operable, or they would be locked at a certain time, or when they were open, the grass was all brown and the turf wasn't done, and it was different experiences. So I started to question that. And then my family, similar to probably some of y'all families, is from the South. We're from Georgia. And so we would go down south every summer. And even that, I'm like, so this rural environment is shaped like this. So I was seeing all these different environments. Also had the benefit, my grandparents owned single family homes in our town, and so they were landlords effectively. So navigating that, seeing them go to city hall to get permits to do an addition and different things like that. My grandfather worked in construction, so I was kind of like in it, around it, but didn't know that urban planning was a thing. At most, I thought that everything was like real estate or everything was construction or architecture. But when you learn what urban planning is, I learned about urban planning my sophomore year in college. It was actually a brand new major at the university. I went to Rutgers. They didn't have that major before. They had a graduate program, but not the undergraduate program. And I initially went into psychology, right? So always in this field of wanting to help others, wanting to use my talents to help others. And I translated that from psychology to urban planning. And so my whole thing in planning is really how the built environment impacts our physical and our mental health. And that's been the space of all of my research and my policy, and truly where my passion is in that space.
Wow, that's amazing. And I know with Dayna, you mentioned that you're the non-planner of the group. But like I said, I mean, your perspective and your education, you're bringing all of that into this space. And so, as urban planning as a field, and in the work that we do, that you see with your co-host with Nina, and in following the work that we all do collectively, how did you kind of get introduced to this urban planning space, and what is your understanding coming into the space as an engineer and somebody from a different background?
Yeah, good question. My first introduction to even understanding the words urban and planning next to each other was sitting next to Nina when she was applying to grad school of like what urban planning is. So I would say Nina is the doorway into kind of understanding what urban planning was with
I
the
love it.
definition, like with using the actual language of it. But for me, being from Detroit, and then also my dad is a natural historian of here's where the city was, here's what used to be in the city, here's how this works, here's kind of just driving around the city growing up, having that introduction. But then post understanding the words from Nina, I've also lived in almost so many major cities throughout the country because of my work. I've lived in Seattle. I live in Brooklyn right now. I've lived in Chicago. I went to grad school at Duke in North Carolina. So my introduction to cities has been mainly being a part of the gentrification in these cities, but then also having a different feeling being from Detroit as Detroit is going through gentrification. So kind of that dichotomy of where I live, I am, depending on if you would call Black people gentrifiers, and some people have different conversations about that, but I benefit from the gentrification of these cities that I moved to because I am moving and can afford to live in these higher these places with higher rent. I am living in buildings that were previously displacing like the community, but then on the flip side, I'm from Detroit and I see how that's negatively impacting 99.9% of my family is in Detroit, if not in Mississippi and Georgia. So it's interesting now, coupled with the years of Nina talking about her career, just being her friend and podcast co-host. So kind of seeing how I am contributing or play a part into this, and then being able to have the proper language to say like, oh, this is a food desert. I actually learned what that was from Nina. Like, why can I find what I want around me? She's like, you may live in a food desert. And it's like, oh,
girl, let me tell you.
Yeah, she's like, let me tell you what that means. And I'm like, oh, look, it's language to the things that I'm witnessing and seeing, which then makes me more curious of like, well, how am I impacting the community when I move into these cities because of my job? Like, what can I be doing? And I would say, because I am Black and come from a very community-based culture and family, a lot of the things are default of like, oh, I come from a place, from a community. So even if I am contributing to the gentrification, how can I not add to, add to it on a personal level? Yeah, or undo. So yeah, I would say Nina and lived experience was my introduction.
That sounds like a master's degree right there.
Right. I run a strict program. Everybody got to know the topics.
No,
hey,
listen. My friends are always like, I feel like I learned so much, and because you're always talking. You might be in the car, you might go somewhere, you might hear them complain about traffic, and it's like, well,
right.
But the reason why.
Let me get on my.
Let me start talking on my soapbox. I can break it all down for you.
Listen, at least the way that you were introduced to urban planner had context. I told my mom I was going to be an urban planner, and she was like, "Boy, what are you doing trying to plan parties? Is that I know that ain't the profession you're trying to go into. You know what I mean?" So
party promotion.
she thought I was like, trying to do the party planner thing. So I really appreciate you sharing that perspective, because you mentioned a couple of topics that I know we're going to cover some of those in series 2, media literacy and some of the ways that folks can be involved. And then in the third part of the series, you mentioned gentrification, and I think that highlights some of these things that we're trying to bring to light, which is the systems and the institutions that, contribute to some of the things that impact our community. And so being able to understand it from the perspective of how we influence those systems and institutions and how we're impacted by them, is really the way that I came into the urban planning space, of like asking that question that Nina said was why, right? Like why is the system this way? And so, having some of those shared experiences, often is how a lot of us come into this urban planning field. But one of the things that's really become more pronounced, I think, over the last couple of years, as I've seen more and more, Black and brown folks come into the urban planning space, is that there's these intergenerational and, cross community kind of conversations that are taking place that, sometimes things get lost in communication, or they're lost in these kind of intergenerational dynamics. Now, we know that exists in a lot of different fields, but within urban planners, what would be some of the positive ways that you've had experiences with older Black planners or younger Black planners that you may have supported or may have supported you in entering the field and in the work that you're doing currently?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely start. When I decided to go into planning, I knew almost nothing. And then I moved across the country to a place that had no real connections except for the friends that I made at an internship in DC. So I was kind of coming into it being like, all right, I really got to explore this world, which I think was good for me because I really had to pour myself into it. And I'm the type of person, I mean, it's the Detroiter in me, it's the Delta in me, it's all sorts of things. I'm going to figure it out. Like, if I don't know it, I want to do it. I have a passion, I have a purpose, I'm going to figure it out. So part of that passion and purpose for me was to connect with other Black planners, if I could, planners of color as the next ring, and then go from there. And so I really started out going to American Planning Association conferences, especially in California, because the APA network is very robust, and trying to find people there, but I didn't see people who looked like me. And I remember there was a state conference, I want to say it was in Oakland, and I saw Angela Brooks in the hallway. Angela Brooks, which if you know Angela Brooks, she probably introduced you to this field or has helped you in some way. And I saw her passing me in the hallway, and I think I was like, oh, another Black woman. And I think I walked up to her and I said, hey, I haven't seen another Black woman. I think she was the keynote speaker at that time talking about housing. And I was like, I would love to connect with you. She lived in Chicago, I lived in LA. And to this day, she has been my mentor, sister, friend, and has helped me so much and has connected me with the greats of like Black folks in LA who have been doing this work. And so, yeah, just that was the entry point. And then from there, I started to cultivate a kind of network of Black planners in California, and then started to expand that as I started to go to national conferences. And then I started to create more intentional programming like Planning While Black. Hashtag Planning While Black. I started that in 2020 after, we were in COVID. George Floyd had just been murdered. And I was like, we need a place that's for us, by us. So I started to take my informal kind of way of getting people together. And if you know me again in my personal life, I am a connector. I love being around folks. I'm the host. I'm the house who hosts all the time. You can stay at my place. I'm happy to have a party. I'm happy to, because yes, that's just my spirit. And so I started taking that informal to more formal and creating programming at the conference, because I knew that Black folks and we may not have had the resources to get together on our own, but APA was the way, using that infrastructure where our employers were saying, yes, go to this thing. And then I would create Black spaces in those conferences. And then it just kind of expanded from there. And I think my pedagogy I've really learned from the OGs, and then creating Planning While Black introduced it to a new generation, because I'm a millennial. I was born in 1990. I came into the field in the mid 2010s. And so there wasn't a lot of space for us. And so I brought it to a new generation. And as time has gone on, it's grown beyond me, where people are inviting. Now we have a chat that has over 450 Black planners in it. And that's just from people adding people as they go to conferences and creating that space. So, yeah. Oh, is that?
Yeah, no, my bad.
Nope.
So Jasmine and Dayna, as you kind of navigate these spaces, what has been kind of your experience in being supported or educated in the space of urban planner by maybe folks who have been in the space for a while, or are there any types of folks who have mentored you or that you've mentored that have had an impact on your career so far?
Dayna, you want to go?
I'll say, for me, again, most of my understanding of urban planning is through Nina. So I think more so, while she's not older and kind of more older than me in it, is more informed of, hey, I just moved to Seattle and I'm noticing there's a high homeless population where I'm living. Being able to research that and say, oh, this has been going on for whatever. And her being able to give me the context of, oh, well, this is what's actually being able to go on, or what's actually going on. I think that, and then again, I had mentioned from my dad, who is an unofficial historian of the city of Detroit. So even having his like perspective on, I know, like redoing the train station, and here's the why behind it. Here's the people who bought it. Here's the people who fund what's going on in the city. Like when you see these names and you see like being able to understand what's going on, and from his perspective, he works in sales, so it's not he has a understanding in urban planning, but more so a curiosity of his city. So Nina, even when you mentioned like being able to ask the why, that's interesting because I actually read a book, Start With Why, by Simon Sinek, and that's focused, I was reading it from the lens of like product management and understanding when you're building these tech products, start with the why. Like, why does your customer need this? Why are you building this? All that aspect. So it's interesting to see how even my curiosity within the cities of, well, why is this like this? Why does this benefit, or why does this benefit me moving in, but it doesn't benefit my family living in Detroit? Like even asking those questions as a non-urban planner, and Nina or my dad directing me into the answers has also sparked my curiosity of like, oh, now I can learn this on my own to be able to have conversations or even understand. Even right now, I'm living in Brooklyn now, but I will be moving soon. So even understanding the next place of where I'm going, like understanding the city, understanding the different aspects of it, I would say too has lended itself to now everywhere I go, even if I'm traveling, am out of the country, like what is the economic impact of what's going on with where I am? So I would say even having
Does
a
it
more
make you? Oh, sorry,
curious
Dana. I
mind.
wanted to get on to take on that thread. Does the introduction to those ideas make you make decisions differently?
Yes, I haven't been to Hawaii since I no, seriously,
Okay.
like that was a thought of
Yeah,
like, ooh, do
okay.
I want to
No,
go
that's
to Hawaii?
real.
Especially
Yeah.
while I was living in Seattle. And it's just too much. It's too much going on for me to contribute when the sole reason I'm going there is for my relaxation. So even if I don't understand the why, it's enough awareness. And I think I made that decision on my own. Look, not with Dad or Nina,
Yeah.
but I made that decision on my own of, oh, I'm contributing, even if it's financially, economically, whatever, like, is that benefiting the community that's there, not the corporations. I think that's different too, like the businesses, the people. Like if I'm going somewhere, am I contributing to like small businesses? And coupled with just being Black, and even with like now with the Target boycott, I think there's some layers of revolution and community protesting and things like that outside of urban planning, because I'm Black, I'm familiar with. But then this extra layer of how can I make sure I'm not causing or adding to any harm where I'm going? That definitely has, like, that's in my kind of binoculars of how I travel, or how I occupy spaces, because of what I'm constantly learning via my association with urban planning. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to pick up that thread because I feel like, again, sometimes people are making decisions just because they lack the information, right? And so, like, even informally, right? We're friends, we're line sisters, we're business partners, and even just informally, you've changed your habits based on the information that I'm giving you. And so, like planners, as we think about, especially Black planners, we're in community, right? We're fighting for a certain type of constituency, but we're also of those communities, right?
Yeah.
And so we informally give the people around us information so that they can start making different decisions, or going to city hall and asking the right questions, right? Asking the whys to the people who are elected, or the people behind those desks, which get which comes off differently. So just wanted to pull on that thread a little bit to see if that was true. Jasmine, what do you think?
No, when I think of, it's an interesting question, right? Who were my mentors in of an older generation of planners? Because I have great mentors. I think of Charles Brown. I think of Veronica Davis. I think of my professor, Dr. Nisha Boshway from Georgia Tech, who was the reason why I went to Tech and really connected the public health and urban planning for me. But I really look at our Black power leaders, our civil rights leaders, as the older generation of urban planners. I don't think that they had the language either, right? To understand the things that they were asking for fit under this guise of urban planning, or the things they were fighting against were actions of planners, right? They were fighting against highways being built in their neighborhood, or not being able to get a mortgage to move into a particular part of town, or not being able to get a mortgage anywhere, right? And they were advocating for housing justice and fairness in those ways, but they weren't using it under the guise of urban planning. So I think of the Black Panthers in Oakland and all the different cities that they operated in, just doing those community organizing and filling in the voids where the government lacked and where the individual's personal dollars lacked. I think of those people as planners, and they really shape my ethos and the way I approach the profession, because I'm always thinking about it from a justice perspective of how can this be done better, right? There were harms done to our neighborhoods through urban planning, and I see their leadership as really my guide for how I approach solutions.
No, that's on point, and I think one of the threads that has come out of this kind of conversation, and you mentioned it, Dayna. So it's one of my frat brothers who did something that I'm in disagreement with. I'm just going to say it out loud, which is you mentioned the Target boycott, right? And so you have folks who this disconnect between generations. There are people who may have been a part of a civil rights movement, or may have been a part of leading a portion of a movement, and not really understanding how movements work today, right? And so as somebody like myself, born in the 1980, I'm an OG right now, you know what I mean? As they call me around the way.
I was born in the last 3 days of the 80s, so I still.
Right.
There you go.
December
28th of 89.
Baby. Okay.
Yeah.
It's one of those situations where it's like, as an 80s baby, my perspective, like I was around during the crack era, where our neighborhoods and our communities were under siege, right? Like in a different way. But my experience, I bring that all to this urban planning space. But what I've always tried to do, and I think that some of our elders don't think about, is that yes, our perspective is important, right? But as we get older and we kind of transition into these other spaces, yes, we can be a part of the movement, but the roles we play need to change. And we got to be even more aware of what that role is and defining that for ourselves. And so, I wanted to kind of use this space as an opportunity for you all as look, I'm the OG. I got my perspective, and folks are going to hear that, whatever. But from you all as being, mid-career, early career, and being in the space, like navigating the challenges of gatekeeping, folks who like want to make sure that you bow down and pay your dues and all of these different kind of things. Yeah. Like we living in a different world where every person in the movement matters, as opposed to we need one voice or we need one person to be leading these conversations. So I want to hear from you. Like, what are some of the challenges, that you faced in spaces where there's this kind of opposition between generations about like who should lead and how you should lead, and the gatekeeping that takes place?
Well, I can definitely speak to this. I mean, I'm sure we all can. I think specifically because I worked in government, and then I have been very heavily involved in APA as a structure for, again, almost over a decade, right? These are two very inflexible structures, which I have navigated with as much grace as I can, rising up the ranks by admittedly, like we all do, assimilating to some of the rules, but then also saying, I want to do this differently. And the good thing about when you're good at your job, you get to have a little bit more cachet and say of how you want to do things. So as I proved myself in both the industry like being in government is a very specific type of planner, right?
Yeah.
and then being in APA is also a very specific type of leadership style. I've been able to work my way up those ranks without, in my terms, sacrificing too much of myself. And when I did, I decided to. I was on the National Planning Board, and I actually bowed out 2 years earlier, this past December, because I just wasn't. It just was no longer values aligned, and I could no longer make excuses for the harmful behavior that the organization was perpetuating, specifically towards me and our members. And I think there were times, like I remember the first time I wear my hair super natural, like I wore it in like an afro, kind of like Jasmine's afro. And I remember one of my mentors, who I love, and she's still a mentor to me. She was like, "Oh, you look very," I forget what term she used, but like authentic, or like it was like an undertone of a, "Oh, you came to work real black today," was the undertone. And I was like, yes,
She
yes,
called you sounds of blackness.
Not just today,
she
every
did.
day. That's how you supposed to show up.
Sounds of blackness in the building today.
And it was as simple as that, right? So a hairstyle, and she was like, "Oh, you sure you want to, like, you usually wear?" I'm like, "Nope, I ran, so I mean, like, you ran so I could run." Up to something even more serious, where in APA I had a disagreement with my mentor, and it was very stark, and getting feedback or criticism saying, "Oh, the way you are talking to people or emailing people, or the way you are trying to hold people accountable, I don't agree with." And me being like, again, you ran so I could run, and respectfully, we are in disagreement by the harm that is being caused and how to call out that harm. And I am using the same mechanisms that they give these white people, but you see, you can't deny that they are not allowing me to use this system in the same way they let other people within power use the system, right? I'm going through the systems, I'm going through the channels, I'm filing the reports, I'm sending the email with the keywords, you know, and saying like the discrimination is still there even when you follow their rules. And I think lately that is something that I've had to come to a head with, even as a leader for my own organization that's 50 years old. And I am, again, squarely millennial, supervising five generations: boomers, Xers, millennials, Gen Z. I don't have no Gen Alpha, so 4 generations of people. And even that is a task in itself, right? Because everybody has a different understanding. It's like, do we talk about the genocide that's happening in Palestine? Well, I had people say, don't touch that with a 10-foot pole. And then I have other people who are saying, we have to talk about this because the global, what's happening globally affects the work that we do locally. And I agree, right? But I also understand how capitalism works. And I also understand. So it's like me trying to bring everybody along and say, like, how do we get towards what we all want, right? Because we ultimately are values aligned, but we have to start listening to each other and not holding on to our preconceived notions about certain aspects of how to approach the work, and then also being humble enough to learn from our predecessors and take what's useful and be honest about what's not. And then we need to talk to each other and keep moving. So but like, again, my experience has been in very structured, very rigid systems, and that's kind of been my way of navigating through them. So yeah, Jasmine, Dayna, what are yours experience?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me in dealing with, and it's interesting because I have the same, where I have like Gen X beneath me. I'm a millennial, and Gen X beneath me, and then I have some boomers, but I also have some latest and greatest above me also, with my grandparents who are in their 90s. So there's an interesting dynamic between the older generation feeling that some of the things I advocate for, I'm asking for, are a bit out there, right? They've dealt with so much harm, so much neglect, so much promises unfulfilled by our government that they're scarred, and rightfully so. And they're distrusting of certain systems. And then I have generations beneath me who want to scrap everything and don't listen to nothing and do it all over again. And so trying to thread that balance between actionable things that are today that might be pushing the needle, and actionable things today that get us started to some of those more progressive things that the younger generation does want to see happen. I agree with them on, but I know that things take time and you got to work through the individual pieces. But at the same things, Nina, I think anytime you show up as a Black person, especially as a Black woman, into a space where you are knowledgeable and you have the language and you have the degrees, and you have the experience. You already talk about having a decade of experience and more. You're still going to be questioned. People are still not going to believe what you're saying, or agree with what you're saying, or double check your work. And that's fine and dandy because you know that you've done your due diligence. But it's another thing when that's used as a way to discredit you, or used as a way to not pursue the thing that you're asking for, the thing that you're challenging, because you can't be impartial. I've gotten that a lot, that because I'm a Black person and something might be happening in a Black neighborhood, that I can't be impartial to it. I might have too many emotions around it. And I always feel like in planning, some cities, I know in the city of Newark, you have to live in the city to work in the planning department, and in other cities like that. And so to me, that's important, right? You should care about the neighborhood deeply that you're planning for, you're designing for, you're making decisions around. I think it's bad planning when you do it and you've never been there, you've never talked to someone who lives there. So it's a thin line with a lot of those challenges.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't even stop to think of like, oh, and not every city you could be from a suburb and then move to an inner city and have opinions on what's going on and what to do and where this should go. Yeah, Detroit, that's what I'm like.
Detroit used to have. Sorry, this is just a fun fact. Detroit used to have a requirement for like city employees to live in the city, but then, of course, because of white flight and kind of disinvestment, and there was a large movement from police and fire to have the ability to live outside the city. And so, I want to say for the last, I don't want to misquote. Maybe it's 1980s, 1990s. They've been able to live outside the city. So there was a lot of people who lived in the suburbs or whatever.
New York.
As a community member, how can I revert that in Detroit?
Well, that was a state. I think it was a state.
What do I need to vote on?
I want to say it's like a state statute now, so we would have to reverse a state law. But yeah, I mean, it happens.
In New York,
as a community member, can I reverse a state law?
You can.
Yes, you can lobby to reverse a state law. Absolutely. The same way they lobby to change the law to what it is right now, it can absolutely
do it to do the reverse. It's interesting in New York City, every department but the police have to live in the city. The police is the only department that doesn't. So you could be a NYPD officer and live in New Jersey. You can live in Westchester. And I think that if anybody need to live in the city, it should be y'all with the guns. But that's my perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's that perspective of like, this is not the community I police. This is the community I live in. There's a different perspective that we absolutely need to have in some of these spaces. And so I couldn't agree more about that. You know, the requirement of living in the city and that you serve, right? Like, I think that's one of those pieces that creates a disconnect and creates a power dynamic that, you know, as opposed to like, hey, these are the things that I'm doing in support of my neighbors. This is the stuff that I'm doing in support of the population that I'm managing, right? As opposed to I'm serving. So those kind of perspectives change. But I really appreciate, you know, the thoughts from you all, because as being an older planner, and coming to this work from a different light and perspective, I had to deal with some of the, you know, the gatekeeping components of this work as well. And to the point where now it's like, I'm super sensitive to, you know, being not just making sure that I'm using my voice, but creating spaces where other voices can be heard as well. And so, you know, as you kind of move forward in your work and in the spaces that you traverse, you know, what are some of the things that you believe planners in the field, both older planners and younger planners, can learn from each other, or that they can both bring to help strengthen the work that we're doing to improve all of the communities that we're serving respectively?
I'll start because I think me and my cousins have been having this conversation a lot with the younger generation. I think that because of the internet, because of AI, it's easy for someone who might be 18, 19, 21 to feel like they don't need to spend the time listening to someone who's much older than them, someone who's in their 50s or their 60s, because they can just Google it. They could just ask AI. Like, that person's information is on the internet. But I would challenge all of us and encourage all of us to really sit with our elders and really ask them questions. What was this like for you? How did you navigate this? How did y'all actually overcome this? When this was happening, what was your role? What were you experiencing? Because all of our stories, right, the stories of Black people who lived in urban areas are not documented accurately. They're not captured in the archives or in the history. And we're going to need that moving forward. We're going to need their, what's it called? You don't want to have, when someone leaves a company and you lose that knowledge, like the knowledge transfer, we don't want that knowledge transfer to be lost, because our knowledge is not being documented and saved and stored and 100%. Translated across into AI. It's it's story based, it's archival, it's in your house, it's in that box in your grandma's basement. Like that's the stuff that we need to
written in her
really keep
Bibles.
track of. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Like you need to keep track of those things. And just because that person who you might talk to may have done some things in their past, they're not going to be perfect, doesn't mean that their experience isn't valid or isn't real, or the way that they contributed to society, even with their flaws, can be ignored.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And even from a non-planning perspective, but even of just, it's funny, I'm on my dad's side, I've been sitting with my aunt who's well into her 70s with a voice note, pressing record, saying, tell me about your parents, tell me about this, of like really that first-hand experience knowledge. And even from Jasmine, you were mentioning like with AI and things on the internet, we were all alive for 9/11, right? And even if you watch all the documentaries of what actually happened at that event, your own lived experience, and I was in this, I was here, I was on the radio, I was at school doing whatever, that's a different perspective than even if you watch all the different like documentaries and things like that. My perspective, I was in middle school compared to my father's, compared to my grandfather. Like even my grandfather's view of that was like, oh, it's another thing, because he was 80 at the time. So all of that as a black man in America, like his perspective on events, given his pre-context of what led up to that, informs what he's thinking. So if I think of just life events and how getting that wisdom from our elders, and also I'm a proponent of take the meat and leave the bones. So what what information can I get, the wisdom from the previous generations, but take out some of the misogynoir, some of the, you thought that way because you had to think this way, or like you're a 70-year-old man, so your concept of me coming in being a woman is like you need time to process that. Take that time, but leave those opinions outside of the conversation that we're having. And even with generations younger than us, like still they have fresh ideas. They're not jaded by 70 years of trying to do something and being, of cities pain, being burned down. Yeah, of pain, of trauma, of all of that. They have fresh ideas that may need the wisdom to be able to implement them. So even being able to take all of that is beneficial. And then also noting, even sometimes my opinions on things as a millennial, I can have a thought and say, "Ooh, I was raised by boomers, and this is a boomer thought," and I need to check myself of like, even working with Gen Z at work, it's like, "Ooh, I know, like we want to have work-life balance, but the work got to be in the balance too, y'all. Y'all got to do something. Like
the work has to be in the balance.
Y'all got to do something. It can't be all vibes, guys. Like it can't be all vibes.
Oh my God, the work has to
and
be
like
in the balance.
of I understand where they're coming from, right? And I'm trying to be the change I want to see in this workplace, but like you gotta give me something. So I think kind of having all of that in frame of this, it helps to add to like, take the meat and leave the bones.
That's a great saying
that
too.
Means look, for the vegans, that means take the good part and leave the other stuff.
I don't know what it means for vegans. Just eat around it.
Take the cauliflower, leave the
wings. Yeah, for me, I love what y'all are saying about like definitely looking at the past, looking to the people who are literally right next to us. Like my mama's basement has flooded every year. Like there are people within our lives who we can ask about their experience, and it helps to inform us. I think for me, my personal pedagogy has been like to learn from my elders, take the meat and leave the bones, like you said, and then pass that on to the next generation. So a few ways that I do this is I was able to create a course at the University of Chicago called Leading for Change, which is exactly parallel to my career, which has been working in very inflexible institutions, but understanding how to have a transformational leadership pedagogy as I navigate those places. And so I'm working with undergraduate students. It's in his fourth year now, and Jermaine always comes through because in this class, I take them on a field trip to Detroit for a whole weekend to have them engage
from Chicago
partners from Chicago, right? I'm taking them out of the context in which they're learning planning and putting them in a different context on purpose. One, because I think Detroit has a lot of great great things to learn about how leadership decisions translate into the built environment. And then two, to get them out that context so they are forced to engage with the public in a way that they have not been taught. I mean, planning curriculum is like any other curriculum. It is based on kind of the prescriptive white male gaze, and it has improved over time, but obviously it is not rooted in that. So to even, a lot of people have never even had a Black woman professor before teaching a planning course. And I specifically focused on leadership because that is something that you don't learn in school. And so many planners have done harm because they do not have leadership skills or interpersonal skills or understand how to translate the values of community members earnestly into policy and process and culture change. And so that is something that I really enjoy and something that was really important to me. I know not everybody can teach a university course. So, you know, obviously there are other ways. So like at the conference, like I mentioned, I do Planning While Black, and that was my way of getting generational perspectives on a particular topic. So I mean, at this point, I've done so many I can't even name, but we had one about affordable housing and how do we, you know, in this post COVID world, how do we work together to make sure that we can keep the momentum that we had during COVID now that things are being walked back? And that was multi-generational panel. At the conference, I have a Planning While Black session that's around Detroit perspective. So like different people who are from Detroit in various fields, and like how did being from Detroit change their way or shape their way of approaching planning as a profession. So those are the types of conversations I like to have. I've had group chats. I mean, even the podcast, Dayna, like obviously our podcast is around Black women, Black professional women, but always trying to spit game whenever I can to those who are interested. I make myself available to anybody who wants to talk, which I know a lot of people are like, why are you so accessible? You should not be this accessible, Nina, because I do run, you know, I am busy, but at the same time, I think it's part of my way of giving back. And then I just started a Substack in which I have really been explicit about the uncomfortable parts of what it means to be in this profession as a Black woman. And at first I was like, oh, like, how is this going to go? How are people going to perceive this? But so many, especially Black women who are in this industry, have reached out to me to say, thank you for being so raw. Thank you for being so honest. You are, you know, I could have written this piece, or you have given me a new perspective, and I'm coming into the field and now I have a different way of looking at it. Because for me, and I know for some Black folks, it's like, oh, we handle all of our mess in the dark. Like we don't call out institutions publicly. We don't, because we're scared of our reputations being hit. We're scared of being blackballed, which is something that I've had to come to terms with too, of accepting I will be blackballed in some circles, but I would rather do good by sharing my story than to not. And so I think those are all ways that all of us can control, all of us on this call, but all of us listening, we could get to control how our narrative is explained, and what information we're able to give the next generation so that they can make better decisions. And so I think that that's something that, again, we should all be doing no matter what generation we're in, because there's always somebody who can learn from us based on our lived experiences.
You know, I couldn't agree more. And I think that one of the things that I always encourage planners, whether they're older planners, younger planners, and just community members as a whole, is like, if you're coming into a community, the first thing that you're supposed to do is be quiet and listen, right? You need to get the perspective of those folks who are in that space and their understanding of what their space and what it means to them, how they're navigating that space. What are some of the challenges? What are the positives? Because we can come in with our education, we can come in with our lived experience and perspective, but if you're not in this space 24/7 and you're not facing the battles that these folks are facing on a day-to-day basis, how can you give the right advice if you haven't heard what's happening first? And so I do think that, you know, as we move forward in our profession and in our communities as a whole, is that we need to, first and foremost, acknowledge that Black women have always led in our communities. They haven't always gotten the shine or the opportunity in ways that they should have, but they have always been leaders, whether quiet or very vocal. And without them, and without you all on this call being in these spaces, navigating and leading in the way that you do, we wouldn't see the progress that we've seen in our profession. And I can guarantee you, moving forward, that we won't be successful in the work we do without you. So I want to just say thank you for being on this podcast with me today. Thank you for sharing space with me. And as we kind of move the close here today, I just got to say this for those folks who are listening, to those folks who are looking for the message that you can receive when you come to the Planner with a Purpose activation in April, is that always remember that we must ensure that we build these bridges between the OGs, the folks who have made career emergent planners, that we know that there are valuable lessons in all of those spaces. When you were a younger planner, you got lessons. You're a mid-career planner, you're an older planner. There are lessons to be learned. And I think in particular for those older planners who are in the space, we don't know everything. We need to make sure that we are listening with our ears, opening up our minds and hearts to the new generation strategy and the way that they're looking to move things, because quite frankly, we need them for the future of this field. And when we're old and gray and kind of sitting in some of these neighborhoods, or you're retired and you're looking around and the neighborhoods are still going to be moving, and you want to make sure that you had a role in helping to influence that in a positive way and not take advantage of trying to keep old ideas and old ideals leading when they have no place in our profession. So just wanted to just make sure that we say that. Looking forward to seeing you all. Make sure that you're following the Planner with a Purpose for updates on the activation that's going to be in Detroit. Again, starting Thursday, April 23rd. And no matter where you're listening, remember, anytime, anywhere, any place, the streets are planning. This episode is part 1 of a 3-part special podcast collaboration series, bringing together 3 platforms that explore culture, community, and the future of our cities while centering voices of the marginalized. This collaboration series leads up to a Planner with a Purpose's activation weekend in Detroit, where planners, creatives, and community leaders will come together to explore how planning, culture, and community storytelling intersect, taking place during the National Planning Conference for the American Planning Association. A Planner with a Purpose is a curated set of experiences designed to support planners and civic leaders navigating an increasingly complex and demanding moment. Grounded in care, clarity, and collective power, the event creates space for honest conversation, practical tools, and connection beyond traditional professional programming. Be sure to join us starting on Thursday, April 23rd in Detroit, Michigan. For more information on the weekend, follow at Planner with a Purpose on TikTok and IG. The series is a collaboration between the Streets Are Planning podcast in part 1, Queen Tone for part 2, and 4 Degrees to the Streets closing out part 3. The Streets Are Planning podcast is hosted by Jermaine Ruffin. Be sure to follow at The Streets Are Planning on IG. Queen Tone is hosted by Dayna Cole and Nina Idemudia. Be sure to follow them at Queen Tone Pod. 4 Degrees to the Streets is hosted by Jasmine Jones-Bynes. Check out her at the 4 Degrees Pod on IG, YouTube, and Substack. This collaboration series is produced and edited by Dayna Cole of Dayna Co. LLC, Audio Consultancy. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to continuing the conversation across all 3 podcasts.